neighborhood market on Commerce Street in Katie's. Delicious homemade goodness and Perry's Floors and More.
String Beans Coffee House in downtown Princeton specializes in made-to-order espresso drinks. Stop by Monday through Friday from 7 a.m. to noon and enjoy a pick-me-up. You can also enjoy fresh-baked scones, homemade chocolate chip and oatmeal raisin cookies, and espresso brownies that'll keep you going all day long. They're also open on Saturday from 9 to 2. String Beans Coffee House on Lower Main in Princeton. Great coffee and more in a great atmosphere on Lower Main in downtown Princeton.
And a very good morning to you. It's Thursday. It's 8 minutes now past the hour of 8 o'clock. Welcome to Tiger Talk here in your hometown radio station, WPKY The Tiger. Have the pleasure of welcoming to the WPKY studios this morning 4th District Representative Lynn Bechler. Also have Roy Gene Rogers here. I call him political man extraordinaire, but
I've been called worse.
Yeah,
lots of times.
Well, the reason why Roy Gene is here, I want to mention, is that Roy Gene is a retired teacher himself, and he studies political science. He studies Frankfurt. He studies national politics as well, and we've talked about this, off the microphone, the situation that's going on in Frankfurt quite a bit. He studies it and I think has a pulse on some of the things that are going on up there. So that's why Roy Gene is in the studio helping to facilitate some of these conversations with our senators and representatives. And I have the pleasure of welcoming Mr. Lynn Bechler into the studio from Marion. He's a Republican from Marion and represents the 4th District of Kentucky in the House. So I'll let Roy Gene take it away.
Thank you, Ty. Talked to you a couple of weeks ago about the possibility of getting Senator Ridley and Representative Bechler in to talk, and you were very gracious to allow us to do that. There's a lot of misinformation out there, lots of misinformation, and I know when Dorsey was in Tuesday, he went over some things, and Lynn, we're going to let him just start out. I mean, the pension bill, the budget bill, the revenue bill were all the big items this time. As a retired teacher, I love the budget bill. I looked at the revenue bill. We got to have revenue to fund the budget. I mean, we can't do that. So I'm just going to turn it over to you and let you explain some of the things that happened. The budget bill, maybe we can clarify some of those misinformation out there.
Be happy to do so. Thanks, Ty. And thank you, Roy Gene. The budget bill is the general fund budget bill, or it's called the executive budget, is the primary bill, the primary means that the state has of supporting and paying for everything that we do in the state, and things, calling in there things that we can't do or will not do. To get to the budget, however, we have to have a revenue bill, and that is because, unlike the federal government, the state of Kentucky cannot pass an unbalanced budget. We have to have a revenue that equals the amount that we're going to spend. So the first thing that we have to do is kind of figure out, we go through the budget. I'm going to kind of take you down what the process is. We have there's a working group that goes through what the budget, what the governor proposed, and then what we would kind of like to see in there to change it. And then when that is figured out, then we go to the revenue bill and say, all right, how are we going to get the funds to pay for what is in the budget? Now, this working group in the Republican part of it, the chairman of the House Appropriations and Revenue Committee has charge of that. The chairs of the revenue subcommittees are involved, and then any representative who is interested in the budget can go in and do it. We meet, and I've been doing that, or I did that rather during the session. We go in every night after session is over and go through various parts of the budget. So to get to the budget, as I said, we have to have the revenue bill, and the revenue bill this year is a combination of revenue and tax reform. We've been talking about tax reform for years in Kentucky, and this is the first time that we've ever really gotten to the point where there's legislation addressing it. Basically what House Bill 366 does, which is the revenue bill, is it keeps the state income tax where it is, but it changes the state sales tax where it is, but it changes the state income tax. Right now there are, I believe, 5 maybe income tax brackets that go anywhere from 2% to 6% for individuals. And we've lowered that to a 5% flat tax. To get there, we've eliminated certain deductions, and the only deductions that will be allowed under this plan are home mortgage interest, charitable contributions, and I can't. Roger, you remember offhand what the third one is?
No, I don't. But I mean, you're talking about tax reform. It's been since 1992 since I think there was any tax reform in the state of Kentucky. But let me throw this in while you're looking there. And yesterday we were in a meeting and we talked to a banker, an ex-banker, and we were talking about a lot of people complaining about the wealthy are going to get the greatest tax breaks. But that was something he looked at, and he said, well, proportionally, it's going to be equal to everyone according to your income. But now I don't know. I really, the third break there, I'm not sure what that was. The pension fund, I know one thing is that the pension was lowered from $41,000 to $31,000.
41.1 to 31.1. That is the amount of deduction that. Or the credit, rather. Yeah, it's a deduction that you can take. We have that passed. That was one of the parts of the budget bill that I had a lot of problem with. We went ahead after the budget bill was passed. We have filed another bill that would raise that back to from 31.1 up to 41.1, and we passed that and sent it over to the Senate. And hopefully the Senate will get back to us either tomorrow or Saturday, which are the last 2 days of the session. We go into session tomorrow at 10 o'clock Eastern, and I anticipate that that'll run till about midnight. And then we'll go into session on Saturday, and I once again think that will run till about midnight. The Kentucky Constitution requires us to be out of session by April the 15th. And we can't meet on a Sunday. So April the 14th this year is the last day, and we'll be there. A couple comments I would like to make about both the budget and the revenue bill is that since I've been there, and from what I understand many, many years before that, budgets and revenue bill have not been passed until the last day or two of the session. And the reason that we pushed so hard to have them passed beforehand is that the governor has 10 days after a bill is sent to him to either veto it or sign it, or essentially let it go, come to law without signing. So by doing what we did, we have reinstated our legislative independence as a co-equal branch of government. This is the first time, as I said, since I've been there, and many years before that, where we have not had the opportunity to look at overriding any budget or revenue veto that the governor would make. Interestingly enough, in the state of Kentucky, the governor has line item veto on the budget. Not so much on not on any other bill, but on the budget, the governor can go in and say, I don't like this section, and strike it out. And if that would happen, we would have the opportunity to vote on each one of those sections. I actually expected the governor to line item veto quite a number of things that were in the budget bill this year, but the governor chose to veto the entire budget. I know I've been asked a number of times what my feeling is about whether or not we will override his vetoes, and I think the chances are greater than 50% that we will override. There certainly has been much discussion in our caucus about what the feeling of the caucus is, and I'm equally sure that there's been conversation in the Democrat caucus about the same thing. So it should be an interesting couple of days, and so I would advise everybody to stay tuned. I would like to talk a little bit, if it's okay, about the pension plan, because it seems to me that is where most of the misinformation, or maybe if not most, certainly a lot of misinformation. And I'll start with the teacher system. With you as a retired teacher, I know would be good. And what I'm going to try and do is kind of contrast what the governor's original plan did to what we actually did. If you take a look at what the governor proposed, he had for current teachers, the current law is a defined benefit plan. The governor's plan was to stay in a defined benefit plan until 27 years of service with a 3-year window for over 27. The bill that was passed and has been sent to the governor does not change current law at all. It stays exactly what it is for current teachers. New hires, the governor said he wanted a defined contribution plan, which I actually supported, but there wasn't enough political will in the General Assembly to do that, and so we went with a cash balance plan guarantee so that people cannot lose money on it. Other provisions in the plan, the governor, current law has, you can retire your high 3 with age 55 and 27 years. There's a 3% factor for service in excess of 30 years, and the COLA, our cost of living adjustment, is 1.5% annually. The governor's plan eliminated the high 3 and the 3% factor in 2023 and suspended the 1.5% COLA for 5 years. I want to assure all the teachers that the bill that was passed, there is no change from the current law for any of that. The legislator's pension, I've been getting a lot of conversation about that, and the legislator's pension is not going to be funded this year, so we're not going to get any money.
Let me interrupt right quick. There's a question. I mean, a lot of people are confusing the budget proposed by Governor Bevins in January, State of the Union and budget message. The House is the one that is responsible for revenue bills.
That's correct.
A lot of the things that the governor proposed in his budget are done away with. The budget that came out of the committee and was voted on, March 29th or whatever?
Right.
Restored a lot of the things, a lot of the cuts that Governor Bevins wanted to make.
It
correct?
does. I don't, I can't go through all of them, but I think he had actually tried to take out about 70 programs out of there. And I went through quickly last night just to verify my thought, and I'll go over some things that the governor took out that we put back into budget. And that is county fair grants from the Department of Agriculture, put back in the Kentucky colon cancer screening program, the breast and cervical cancer screening program for ladies, autism training center, the Kentucky Center for Math at Northern Kentucky University. We funded the area development districts. One of the issues that I was struggling hard to make sure got put back in was libraries. Library funding got put back in. The sheriff's expense allowance was removed, and we put that back in as well. There was life safety for closed jails and the local jailer's allowance. The governor wanted to remove those. We put those back in. The Whitehaven Welcome Center down here in Western Kentucky was taken out of the governor's budget, and we put that back in. The Bluegrass State Games was taken out. We put that back in. The Lexington Hearing and Speech Center and the Hauser Hearing and Language Academy were removed. We put those back in. A couple that we did leave out were the work-study scholarships within the Kentucky Higher Education Assistance Authority, teacher scholarships within the Kentucky Higher Education Assistance Authority, early childhood development scholarships, and the Cole County College Completion Scholarship Program. Those are a few of the changes that the budget made that the governor had been taken out. You know, when you look at the budget, you go through a whole number of sections. Budget director, Department of Veterans Affairs, even talk about getting down to osteopathic scholarships and the Executive Branch Ethics Commission. Ethics being kind of an interesting thing nowadays. County attorneys, Department of Ag. We went through all of those, and I believe that we have a good budget. As I mentioned, I'm not comfortable with the additional taxes that were put in the revenue bill, but we have to have those to fund the budget.
Well, Ty and I have been talking about that, and we talked to others. Like we meet together, you know, some of our clubs, and
we love the government.
Yep.
Thank you.
But
that joke goes way
I
back.
mean, that's when I was teaching. He's a summer student. But one of the things is why were a lot of these exempt
In the
to
first place,
begin
yeah.
with? You know, we don't know. So it's being reinstated, not reinstated, but some of them that Ty, you know, we talked about that. But let's talk about SEEK funding.
All right, SEEK funding in our budget, the one that is now sitting vetoed on the governor, past the governor, we put in SEEK funds the highest that they've ever been, $4,000 per student in each fiscal year. And if there's any excess SEEK funding, because that, of course, is based on the number of students who are in school, if there's any excess SEEK funding, it's reallocated to SEEK transportation. The governor had removed SEEK transportation funding, and we put it back in. Now it's at the same level it was before, about $215 million. So, you know, the budget itself, I think, is extremely, extremely good, especially to teachers. Right. I'm still getting, as we've discussed before, I'm still getting emails telling me that I have to vote to do these 3 or 4 things for pensions in the budget that have already passed and been done. So there's not only misinformation out there, but I think there's lack of information. There is a part of me that says that a lot of what is going on right now is really political theater. I think that some people are trying to drive votes in a certain way, and what has happened is not really what is being put out there. We put in the learning and results services. We fully funded health insurance for both certified and classified school district employees. That comes to over $710 million. We keep $1.3 million in place for the Save the Children program. And we restored language to local school districts to provide additional flexibility regarding the use of their extended school services and safe schools funding. We restored funding for the State School of the Blind and the Kentucky School for the Deaf, as I'd mentioned before. And we've restored $7.5 million in each fiscal year for the preschool partnership grant program. Along with a lot of the misinformation that has gone out there, has been some pretty vitriolic language. I've had a retired teacher in the district tell me she wishes I was dead, and in a lot of ways I take that as an implied threat. Certainly didn't do anything about it, but I mean that's the level of of just horrible discourse that we're in. I know I've said some things that I, regret at one time or another, but I've never told anybody that I wish they were dead, and I've never publicly cursed anybody out, and I've had that happen to me too.
How frustrating do you find? I think it would be very frustrating at this point to do your job. But what would you tell? I've seen things in the media, things that allegedly you might have said that would upset our teachers. I was not there to see them, but I saw quotes. So what would you say about, how would you comment to some of those? Is it due to, just like the governor, so to speak? The governor, I think, had some issues on the radio. He sort of was a rant, but I think it was probably frustration. Was yours out of that too? Was it out of frustration?
It was out of frustration. A lot of teachers and retired teachers have been up at the Capitol, and I understand that. And I was going through a line of teachers, and I've been working on education. If you take a look at the results, the state results of high school graduates, statewide, only about 55% of our high school graduates can read and write at grade level, and only about 45% can do math at grade level. I was looking at that. I was going over some things I'd heard about charter schools and a bill that I'll get into in a minute that I was going to go ahead and file. And as I was going over there, one of the teachers said something to the effect of, you have to take care of our teachers. And I said, I'm not worried about the teachers. I'm worried about the students. And then the teacher came back and said, well, we teach we're the ones that teach the students. And this is the one that I regret saying, but I was extremely frustrated. I said, not very well. And that was based on what I just mentioned, that 55% can read and write at grade level upon graduation from high school, and only 45% can do math. Now, when I was in school, anything below 70% was an F. And I don't think 55% and 45% reflects very well on the state of Kentucky. So that was a statement I made, and that's the backstory of why I made it.
Right. And appreciate your explanation of that. I know that I have several, a lot of my friends are teachers, and, they were upset by that, but I wanted you to ask it and get it out there. And I just like the governor's rant on the radio, I think it is out of frustration. You are frustrated. You have an engineering background, from what I understand, and your engineering background, I know that's strong in science and math. And if you see that scores aren't where they need to be, it's frustrating, I'm sure.
It really is.
But another thing, I had retired teachers in here the other day, and I think their concern is what you just expressed, is the fact that if we don't maintain similar benefits or the same they have been, then we will not get quality teachers. Therefore, education in Kentucky will continue to decline. What is your explanation of that? I think their concern has been, well, if we can't get quality people to teach our kids with the benefits the way they have been, and I think the big several of the complaints have been with the pension system and the hybrid, type of savings plan. What would you tell our teachers out there that are either thinking about going into the field, or the ones that are retired that are concerned about the education in Kentucky and where it goes if we don't have solid benefits for our teachers?
I can understand that. The benefits. I go back to the private sector. Now, in the private sector, almost all corporations, all major corporations, have gone to a defined contribution plan rather than a defined benefit plan. And I know that when changes are proposed for our schools and our state employees, the changes that we propose have to be scored, have to be, say, all right, how much is this going to save, what it's going to do, so on and so forth. And the scoring is all based on assumptions that are made. For example, in the past, the assumed rate of return for for pensions has been in the 7.5% range. When you take a look at historical averages, especially when you throw in the recession that we had in 2008, they're much lower. They're down in the 3% range, over the past decade. The current board has made a change in assumptions down to more accurately reflect what returns actually are. And as you lower the anticipated return, the greater the underfunding becomes. So that's part of the issue. One of the things that I don't think everybody realizes is that we hear a lot about the actuarial required contribution, but there is also a state required contribution, and the General Assembly has met that every year. We've been accused of stealing and taking money from the retirement system. During a period of time associated with the Great Recession that we had, we did borrow money from the teachers' fund. That money has been paid back fully and with interest. So we haven't stolen any money. The budget this year puts in over $3.4 billion in the biennium for state pensions. That's the highest it's ever been. This is the first governor, and the first General Assembly that has seriously addressed that. In the past, it's always been kick the can down the road, we'll put in a little bit. This problem has been going on for a number of years. Even the KTRS board admits that if we had the amount of funding that the legislature has put in or has not put in, we're only responsible at most 20% of the underfunding problem. So if we're doing only 20% of the underfunding problem, what is the other 80%? And that is a systemic problem. The pensions were originally set up with the assumption that salaries would always go up and that the number of state employees would always go up, teachers, other state employees. That obviously hasn't happened. So the underlying principle of the defined pension plan that is in place has just fallen on its face. By changing I'm changing horses a little bit here, but by going back to the revenue bill where we're increasing all of that, we have jumped, according to the rating agencies, to about 5%, or in the top 10 in terms of business climate, and in the top 15 in terms of personal income tax stuff. So we have done an excellent job, and I think that the governor and the legislature actually should be commended for attacking this. This has certainly not been an easy issue. There are many hard votes that have been taken, but on balance, I am very satisfied with the overall plans of the pension, the revenue bill, and the budget. It certainly does not meet everything that I would have liked. I'm very fiscally conservative, and I really had a gulp, but I have learned over the years that compromise is not a dirty four-letter word. It has to be done, and you can stand on principle, and I do frequently, but when it comes down to you either get part of the loaf or none of the loaf, I've opted to go for part of the loaf, and that's an internal struggle I have. You mentioned my engineering background. I tend to be more black and white, more fact-based, and so that's kind of how I come down on things and how I vote. I mentioned when we were talking about a bill I was looking to file, 2 years ago when we filed or was it last year? I forget now, they run together. But we passed charter school legislation. And one of the main things I heard from teachers and administrators was, you're passing legislation that removes mandates from schools so that you can get higher performance. If you would take those mandates away from us, from the traditional public schools, we could do the same thing. I filed a bill that would do just that.
Yes.
The bill was called, I think the title was A Bill for Innovation Academies. And it would have taken away the same mandates that were taken away from the public charter schools. And the teachers didn't like it. I had a group of teachers come in from Jefferson County who said, well, you can't take away that mandate, you can't take away this one, you can't take away that one. It just won't work. So with the teachers from Jefferson County saying that, and representatives from other parts of the state who have teachers saying the same thing, I didn't have enough votes to get it out of the committee.
Well, one of my big complaints is there's too much. I mean, our teachers, we got excellent teachers now, and they have to teach to a test. And some of the mandates that you were just talking about, eliminate those and let our teachers teach. They're very qualified to do so. Let's go back to charter schools. You might have mentioned it a while ago. But there is no funding in the budget for charter schools.
That is correct. There's no funding in the budget for charter schools. The legislation that was passed, and it was last year, puts, I think it's June 30th of this year, as the deadline for proposing a charter school, for applying to be a charter school. And nobody's done that yet. So effective July 1st, that is a moot point. Nothing's in there for charter schools this time around.
Well, I had someone mention that the private sector has 401k and Social Security, but teachers, if they won't have Social Security, both. So, how do you respond to that, and saying that they only have the one savings plan as they go forward, and a savings plan that's defined. You never know what will happen to it with their investment. What do you tell the folks about that?
Well, if you bear with me, I'll go through a little history on the Social Security plan. When Social Security first came about in the 1930s during Roosevelt's time in the Depression, teachers were specifically excluded from being able to collect Social Security. Federal law. Nothing the state can do about it. In the 1950s, the law was changed that would allow Social Security for teachers. At that time, the leadership of the teachers came to the state and said, we don't want to be in the plan. Legislature, government said, okay, we won't do it. When we get to the current crisis, one of the thoughts was, let's put teachers in the Social Security plan because people are complaining about not being in it. Once again, representatives of the teachers came and said, no, we don't want that in the bill. We want to have just what we have now. So I have stopped talking about Social Security. That is a decision that teachers or teachers' leadership has made. And so, I think the teachers have to live with that. With regard to the fact that they can't always collect on Social Security, they have to have a certain number of quarters that qualify. There are teachers who have that. Teachers who have started late teaching in the career can collect some Social Security. I think one of the biggest problems, of course, is that a teacher cannot collect the benefits of the Social Security benefits of a spouse if the spouse precedes them in death. I think that's wrong, but there's nothing that the state can do about it.
That's federal law.
That's federal that has to do it.
Let me ask you, a lot of information coming out on social media and other places stating that Governor Bevins is taking the funds and putting them in a hedge fund. I've talked to TRS representatives. Each one of our boards that we actually elect some of the members of that board, they are responsible, correct me if I'm wrong, aren't they responsible for the investments that take place?
They are.
And one other thing that I was asked about yesterday, and I looked, who regulates our health benefits? Is that through the various boards, or is that from the legislature? Like, who is it that is going to take care of our health funds?
The funding comes from what the legislature approves. In Kentucky, we are self-funding for health insurance. It's our plan. We're responsible for it. If you take a look at the plan, if the plan were a for-profit through a for-profit company, what happens is that assumptions are made as to what the payouts are going to be for the coming budget cycle and how much money needs to be collected to do that. We do the same thing in the state, and any addition, if everything isn't paid out, then that money goes into a fund, which in a private sector would be a profit. And what we have done is we've said, all right, since we are a public company, if you will, taken that money that would have been profit, and we are using that money to pay for some health insurance benefits. So nobody's paying any more. We've talked to the people, taken a look at it. There's a public pension oversight board, and there is enough money in there to fund what we are not to pay for what we are not actually funding by definition in the budget. In the budget, it also says, though, that if the funding falls below a certain percentage, that we're going to kick in the money to do it anyway. So hopefully that answers the question. The Public Pension Oversight Board is really the one that takes a look at things,
but
including health.
Who determines what provider we have and what benefits that provider allows retirees and active teachers and state police? And I mean, who determines that? Is that determined by each board? I've read something where TRS is one of those that's responsible for determining who is the provider. I'm not sure.
I think that's the case. I'll have to dig into it because I don't know the answer off the top of my head.
TRS being the teacher retirement system?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and when you were talking about that a second ago, Representative Bechler, when the retired teachers were here the other day, and I don't know how, they went through sort of a history of that, and I think they said that teachers had to pay 12.88% into that. Everybody paid into that TRS system, or by state law is required to make payments into that.
That's correct.
And share that. Now, they say that about 2000, the state didn't make any payments as they paid into that, or just made partial payments into that plan. Can you tell us anything? Or do you know about that? Do you know how accurate that is? That the legislature, that some of this wasn't fully funded for some of that money back about 2000.
I can't address that. I was first elected in 2012 and began serving in 2013, and I've tried to get up on the history of all of this, but I don't know. From everything that I've checked into says that the state has actually met what is in statute to pay for.
Okay. And that's, we'll take it as that. We've got a few more minutes here. We've got about 15 more minutes. I'd like to take a break. Let's catch our breaths.
Okay.
And we will come back and try to summarize, wrap up, and we might have some positives. I know you were responsible for some other legislation that went through and some pretty good things going on up there as well. It's not all bad.
No, it's not.
But we might touch on some of those and then kind of summarize some of our discussion here today. We're about 15 minutes away from the top of the hour. We'll come back after these messages. You're listening to Tiger Talk here in your hometown radio station, WPKY The Tiger.
Hancock on Commerce Street in Cadiz is the place to shop for delicious homemade goodness. Hancock's makes their own fresh chicken salad, pimento cheese, salads, and a variety of mouth-watering desserts sure to please your entire family. While at Hancock's, be sure to visit their meat department for the best selection of USDA choice meats in the area. Hancock's Neighborhood Market in Katie's hometown, homemade goodness, and the Hancock name you know and trust for quality for your family. Hancock's Neighborhood Market on Commerce Street in Katie's.
Since 1978, Perry's Floors and More has been selling, installing, and servicing homeowners throughout Western Kentucky with quality flooring and workmanship. Perry's Floors and More carries luxury vinyl plank and luxury vinyl tile, carpet, window treatments, and more. Quality brands like Mannington, Shaw, Tarkett, Beaulieu, and Flexitech. There is a reason why we say you can walk on our reputation. Come see Bill and Lucy at 127 West Market Street or call 270-365-9869.
String Beans Coffee House in downtown Princeton specializes in made-to-order espresso drinks. Stop by Monday through Friday from 7 a.m. to noon and enjoy a pick-me-up. You can also enjoy fresh-baked scones, homemade chocolate chip and oatmeal raisin cookies, and espresso brownies that'll keep you going all day long. They're also open on Saturday from 9 to 2. String Beans Coffee House on Lower Main in Princeton. Great coffee and more in a great atmosphere on Lower Main in downtown Princeton.
And at 8:47, we are back on Tiger Talk. Representative Lynn Bechler, the 4th District State Representative from Kentucky, here in studio, along with Roy Jean Rogers.
One thing, I got a lot of feedback from retired teachers and teachers that are active, teachers that are in the system today, is that a lot of them sent you messages, emails, tried to contact you concerning issues. Most of it was SB1. And I gave you that question, I think last week we were together, or 2 weeks ago, however how long it's been, and you answered that for me, so I'd like for you to answer that on the air, if you would, please.
I'd be happy to. Thank you for asking. One of the challenges that I face is when to respond to communication from constituents. I have found that if I respond immediately, vote no on SB1 or vote yes or do this or do that, it's actually a moot point because, as you mentioned, SB1 was never brought up for a vote. So for me to go say, I'm going to vote against SB1, and it underwent many changes before it finally didn't make it at all, would not be fair. It would give a false impression. Same thing if I said, yes, I'm going to vote for it. So for better or for worse, I have taken the position that I will respond when I know what all the facts are. And specifically with the pension bill, SB1 never made it to the House for me to vote on. SB 151 became the pension bill. I have responded to every body who contacted me about budget, revenue, and pension. A letter went out late last week, and I would hope that it's in the hands of those folks today. I do not respond on Facebook to Facebook posts because far too frequently the quote conversation unquote drifts into areas, and sometimes it doesn't even drift. It just starts into areas that have nothing to do with the post, and all sorts of comments are made that are either untrue, misinformed, etc. So I respond to anybody who calls me, anybody from the district, anybody who phones me from the district, or anybody who sends me an email from the district. But I wait until I have the facts and can hopefully explain it in a response. So I talked to the legislative assistant yesterday or the day before, I forget which, and was assured that the letter that I wrote has gone out to everyone who contacted me from the district who contacted me about those issues. So I do respond. I don't know how to do it better. I really don't.
You got to be knowledgeable of the subject, I guess, before you can respond. Yes.
Right. If I could just touch on one of the things in the budget, in the pension plan that I haven't talked about before, and then I'd like to get into some other bills. I frequently hear the comment that we have pre-funded our COLA. This gets back to the governor's original plan and subsequent plans about what to do with the teachers' cost of living adjustment. And that's one of those things that is half true. And what I mean by that is there's no doubt that teachers have put in, I think it's 1.75, 1.74% of their pay that is allocated for COLAs in their retirement. That money, however, just goes into the same, practically speaking, that goes into the same pension fund. It's just how it's supposed to be paid out. Well, what happens is that if the fund doesn't grow to handle that, then the state has to make up the difference. So it is not strictly the teachers who are pre-funding the COLA. The state is also doing it. And in the past decade, couple, 3 years, and possibly even more, the state has had to kick in additional money over and above what the teachers put in. So yes, they put in money for pre-funding it, but it doesn't always cover what it is. So now if we could get on to better topics.
Well, there have been some good things going on in Frankfort, and one of those was a bill you sponsored concerning adoption,
Yes.
I do believe.
Yeah, it is.
Let's talk about that.
All right. The way the Kentucky law reads, the primary goal of a child being in foster care is to reunite with the parents. Primary goal. That's well and good if something can be done, and reunification is a good thing. However, there's nothing in the statute that talks about what is in the best interest of the child. And for several years, I have sponsored legislation that would attempt to begin to chop away at that. The way the law currently reads, if a child is in foster care for 15 months out of 22, then the cabinet can file for a termination of parental rights. However, from a practical standpoint, what has happened is that children have been put into foster care. They have been in foster care for a number of months. Then they're given back to the parents, and they subsequently come back to to be in foster care again. Well, then the clock starts over, and so we have kids. I personally know of people who have been waiting 7 years to try and adopt a child that they have fostered. I've heard that there are people up to 10 years. I haven't met those, but I personally know people who have been up to 7 years. So I filed that for 2 years. It had hearings on it. People thought it was, for whatever reason, the committees thought, well, maybe it's too harsh. One of the biggest frustrations I had is the first year that I was told I would have a hearing, I had people come up to testify with me, and when I got into the committee room, the Democrat chair of the committee said, I've changed my mind, we're not going to have a vote, we're just going to discuss it. So I had people come in to testify so that we could get a vote on it, and none was taken. So fast forward, if you will, to this year. During the interim, there was a House special committee or special working group for adoption and foster care. I was pleased that I was chosen to be on that working group. As a result of that, we now have a bill that is on the governor's desk, and I'm confident he'll sign it, that begins to address a whole host of things. We've done a putative father registry. Far too frequently, dads come in late and say, oh, I'm the father of that child. Well, what this does is requires that, instead of going in a long, drawn-out court battle, it says if you believe that you are the father of a child, you come in and register, and then we can go forward with that, and we'll check it out. It also says that if a mother, before the birth of the child, says, well, Joe or Bob or Sam or whoever, may be the father of the child. The cabinet then, and if that if the mother to be can provide a mailing address or contact information, the cabinet will then reach out if they can, if that is to those folks and say, look, you may be the father of this child. If you want rights, sign up for this. So that happened. To my point about the 15 months, the bill puts in there that a total of 15, a cumulative total of 15 out of 48 months, not, direct or anything, a cumulative total, then that is, and that the parents or legal guardian haven't met what the court says you should be doing, then that is considered a form of child abuse. And then that will be, the cabinet can go for a temporary, a suspension, parental rights suspension.
And that bill has been passed.
That bill has been passed by both chambers. It's sitting on the governor's desk. It really is, and I'm confident that he'll change it.
What's the number of that bill?
HB1.
HB1.
Yeah.
All right.
That's the most
Easy to
important.
remember.
We as the House of Representatives decided that was the most important piece of legislation, obviously other than the budget and revenue, that we could have this year. Another bill I'd like to speak about that I sponsored is House Bill 84, and that directly came about because of what happened to a resident of Princeton. A young lady, a 19-year-old lady, Courtney Fleer,
Yes, Courtney.
was I'm sure you've all heard about it,
Yes.
was killed in an automobile accident. She had clearly put on her driver's license that she wanted to be an organ donor. Her family knew about it. She was killed in the auto accident, and the state law was such that while hospitals, when a death occurs, the hospitals contact the Kentucky organ donor affiliates to say we have this, and then they go through the thing to making sure that the person does, the family of the person says yes, that individual can be an organ donor or not. It did not require coroners or medical examiners to do so, and in Courtney's case, CODA was never contacted. So HB 84 it's actually signed into law now. So medical examiners and coroners have to contact CODA. Families can still be involved. Let's see. Another bill that I sponsored was House Bill 100, which addresses heating, ventilating, and air conditioning folks. And the way the Kentucky law had reads now before this one kicks into effect, which has been signed into law, it had a time requirement for folks to practice in the HVAC profession before they could take a test for either journeyman or master technician status. Well, if you had equivalent experience coming in from out of state, you had to be in Kentucky and have more experience than that. HVAC contractors across the state are having trouble, as in all areas, getting qualified personnel. So originally the bill said that the out-of-state people can have a verifiable experience. They are allowed to take the test. I reiterate, all it does is say they can take the test. It doesn't make them in there. As the bill moved forward, we also saw an issue with HVAC companies that every HVAC company has to have, by law, a master technician, either on staff or they're associated with it to do their business. If that person suddenly dies, then the company has to immediately go out of business if they don't have another one. And if it's a family-owned business, then that family and all their employees are losing their income. So what this bill does now, it grants a 6-month period for that company to get another master technician to be there.
Trained or hired or whatever.
Yes, yeah, so that they continue to stay in business.
Well, that's obviously a good thing. And, this is tough work at the level. It's hard enough to get in a meeting room with 5 people no less the numbers that are in Frankfurt. And it's serious stuff we're doing here, and it affects all of us. And one thing that I appreciate is you coming and talking to your constituents about what's going on up there, because there is a lot of confusion, and people want to know what's going on. They want to know your thoughts personally. They want you to respond to their, I think the big thing was, we want you to respond. You clarified that somewhat, as far as Facebook. And everybody's on social media, and I guess they just expect you just to, follow right up with it. But I would just say that, appreciate the time that you had here to come and help clarify some of this stuff. Where are we going now in Frankfurt the next couple of days? What do you foresee happening? Get out your crystal ball.
I think what will happen is we will ultimately choose to have a vote on whether or not to override the governor's vetoes. There are actually 5, I didn't check this morning, but as of yesterday, there were 5 bills that he'd vetoed in their entirety. So I'm sure that we will discuss and probably vote on whether or not to override those. There will be, unfortunately, last-minute legislation. The process is ugly. I mean, it really is to get it done.
Is
but
it as ugly as going on through it with the sewer bill? I mean, and I mean, really, I mean, a lot of questions. How does that get done? I asked a former representative. I go, says it happens all the time, and it happens in Washington.
It does, and I don't know. I wish I had an answer, but on the. And I really wish the legislation had been attached to another bill.
It upsets people. I mean, it really gets people upset.
But as you said, that is common.
That's common.
That's common.
It's common. And a lot of people don't know that that's common practice, but it is out there, and again, on the federal level, at the state level. And
right. Well, what I've tried to explain that, and apparently not well enough over the years, that what actually happens is, and that once again gets back to the question about responding. A bill can come up, and it could be about horses. I'm just making this up. But the bill could start out as a bill about horses. It could be passed out of one chamber. It goes to the other chamber. The other chamber can look at it, and they say, nah, I don't really like that. They strip out all the language about horses and put in language about pigs or people or cars or anything that they want to do, and they send it back. And sometimes when it gets later on in the session, if the idea that of the new bill, of the new language, is okay or good, even though it's not what the original bill said, the other chamber says, all right, that's the only way we can pass this good piece of legislation.
But a lot of people think that's deceit and wrong. I mean, that's just.
I know. I think it's ugly. I don't know of another way to do it. I really don't. I mean, you can't. Every legislator, either in the House or the Senate, we're talking about 138 people, has a right to file legislation that individual thinks is good legislation. Right. And how you do that.
We're firing up the phones.
Right. And interestingly enough, we could make a law that says you can't do that, but the laws that we pass do not hold necessarily for the following legislature. If you go in and take a look at the bills that are passed, there's a word called notwithstanding. Mm-hmm. And what that does, and there are hundreds of them.
Valuable legal term.
A valuable legal term. Yeah, it's kind of like a court of competent jurisdiction. Wow. I've never heard a judge say this is a court of incompetent jurisdiction, but there are. It's all the time. It says notwithstanding KRS 12345.678. We're going to go ahead and do this, and that we're allowed to do that, and I think constitutionally.
Yeah, you start looking at some of the bills that you were talking about. I mean, the pension bill and some of the others. The words "notwithstanding" is almost
they're all it's all
in every paragraph.
Sure,
yes,
sure.
There were approximately, close out, I think there were, if memory serves, there were approximately 1,000 bills filed this session.
Yeah, I mean it's incredible the workload. Not to get into all of it, but everybody ought to try it once to run for something and to be sitting in the seat, because it's a pretty daunting thing. I think, and so certainly appreciate the work that you do for us here in the 4th District.
Thank you.
We thank you for your time. We're about out of time today, but Godspeed back to Frankfort, and
thank you very much.
Hopefully, I probably foresee a special session. I don't know what anybody else says, but that's what I see in my crystal ball.
My crystal ball says no.
Okay. Well, we'll see.
And the special session to find out whose crystal ball is the cloudiest.
But
we'll determine on the
session,
overrides.
Special session's going to cost the taxpayers how much money?
It will.
About $600,000 statewide.
Yep. So,
Wow.
hey, Ty, thank you, and WPKY
Yes.
for allowing Senator Ridley, Representative Bechler to come in and explain some
certainly appreciate
things.
it.
I mean, it helps, and we appreciate it.
It
Ty,
does.
Roy Jean, thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. That's going to wrap up this edition of Tiger Talk. It's a Thursday edition. My thanks to Representative Lynn Bechler of the 4th District of Kentucky. He has a Facebook page. You can check that out. You can also get on to LRC. That's the Legislative Resource Committee, lrc.ky.gov, if you want to communicate with him that way as well. We thank you for your time. We thank you for listening. Yes, he said he will respond. I had your mic turned down. Say it again.
I will respond.
There you go. So that is lrc.ky.gov. My thanks to Roy Jean Rogers as well. That's going to wrap up Tiger Talk at 9:07. Stay tuned. We're going to transition, and we're going to be into the Sideline Report with Todd Griffin here on your hometown radio station, WPKY, The Tiger. Have a good day, everybody. Thank you for listening. Thanks for listening to Tiger Talk, your local source for information about your hometown. Tiger Talk has been brought to you by